Firstly, I would like to welcome you all to our last day of the program. Today, we have with us Mr. Gupta from Elsewhere to handle a session on research impact metrics. Mr. Gupta has 14 years of experience in domains of biotechnology, publishing, and data analytics. Currently, he is employed with Elsewhere as customer consultant South Asia, where he is responsible for supporting Scopus, Science Direct, Mendeley users in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. His major responsibilities include engaging with ministries and key consortiums. Vishal is a certified presenter for author workshops and a level 3 certified Mendeley trainer. With this brief introduction of him, I would like to request him to take over the session. Gupta sir, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir, for this opportunity to interact with the research community that we have today. I'm really honored to be part of this workshop, and I also thank each and every one for giving us this opportunity. So as you mentioned, today I'm going to be covering a very vital topic, which is research metrics. And I think it is only fitting to start with a quote that says, not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. So which really means that we can't trust everything, and that doesn't mean that we should not trust anything. So it's always a balance that we need to maintain, right? So with this, I would like to welcome everyone. Good morning, and I hope all of you are safe, keeping well, getting vaccinated, as we all navigate through these difficult times. I wish the best for you and your family always. So let me start with a quick introduction about Elsevier and what we do. So we all know, I mean, I'm sure all of you know Elsevier as a publisher. We publish research articles, journals, and we are one of the highest read, downloaded, cited publishers globally. But it's not just the publishing workflow. Elsevier over the years has transformed into an information analytics company. And at Elsevier, we've partnered with this scholarly community for over 140 years to curate and verify knowledge. And our motto now is to combine content with technology, supported by operational efficiency, to turn information into actionable knowledge. And that is only possible through specialized tools and databases. Now, I talk about converting information into actionable knowledge, and I talk about a lot of impact that the society has. Now, all of this is measured by what? All of this is measured by metrics. Now, if you talk about research workflow, now there are different ways of looking at the research workflow, right? For example, if I talk about a laboratory scientist, for him or her, it includes research designing, funding, moving through data collection, analysis, finally moving towards assessment and showcasing of information. Now, this is a rough schematic of the research workflow. If I simplify the research workflow, it looks something like this. And what we are trying to show you here is that Elsevier has tools at every stage of the research workflow to support researchers. Because we believe that supporting researchers actually starts by understanding their actual needs. And when we deep dive into researcher needs, we observe that the researcher needs have changed over the past decade. And the reason is pretty simple, because the research scenario has changed. Research has become more complex. It has become more interdisciplinary. There are new topics being researched every day. Editors, increasingly find it difficult to find relevant peer reviewers to review the research articles as well. So the bottom line is that the research industry is changing, and all researchers like you need to align with these changes every day. So to understand this, I think the first important thing for us to know actually is what is the main purpose of research. So in my words, main purpose of research is to basically inform action, to prove a theory, and contribute to the developing knowledge in a field or study. Whereas a word quite synonymous with research nowadays is innovation. And innovation is about taking inventions to the marketplace by translating scientific knowledge into products, services, or offerings for economic or social development. Now, every researcher like you today is striving hard to find opportunities to contribute to its own development, the institute's development, and the country's development overall. And these efforts are bringing a serious change in what today's researchers need. Today's researchers like you are more demanding than ever before. And the reason is pretty simple, as I said earlier, because the research landscape has been changing. And therefore, you look to cite more impactful work, evaluate your own impact, be more organized, find relevant collaborators, manage research data, and much more. And therefore, you look for tools that can help you in achieving these objectives more efficiently. Now, what do these tools do? These tools, in the background, work on some metrics and they give you insights. So everything, I would say every impact is measured by some sort of metrics, right, in the background. Now, no matter how much the industry has changed, one thing remains common, that researchers, the most important thing for researchers is finding quality research articles in top journals or quality journals, right? So to understand this, I think we also need to understand the flow of information, how it flows in the industry. So if you look around you, if you look on the internet, if you talk to few people, if you read newspapers, what you get is data. So you get a lot of data. Now, the main thing is, can you use data? Is it something that can be cited? Is it something that that you can trust upon? No, I think first, data needs to be filtered by using logic. And once you use your logic, it turns into information. So a simple example of this is, let's say you are on Google. Google already has a lot of data. When you put in a few keywords, Google filters out, the specific information from that data and presents it on your screen. Again, the same question. Can you trust information? Can you use information? Probably no, not until it is peer reviewed. So I would say for researchers, the most important keyword is peer reviewed information. And what is peer reviewed information? It is knowledge. Now, with regular application of this knowledge, you start getting insights. And with experience, you can turn these insights into meaningful answers and achieve wisdom. Now, for a researcher, in this entire workflow, there are two very important words, which are information and knowledge. And there is a thin line and a very important line that separates both of them, and it is called peer review. Now, researchers today are faced with ever-growing volumes of information that they need to search, evaluate, and finally incorporate into their work. In the recent years, with the advent of big data and data science, research has become more powerful and more data-driven. Yet, it is becoming increasingly difficult to find the right content to read, the right journal to publish in, etc. So, one thing that I would like to tell you is, before I delve deeper into metrics, remember one thing, it's not always about metrics, right? We'll get to know more about it. Metrics are there to complement your judgment. They're not there to replace your judgment. So it's not always about metrics. It's about common sense. It's about your instincts. And there are a lot of things that together can help you take the right decision. Right. A very important part of the research workflow is the editorial process. The process when you submit a research article and it finally goes to the editor. Now, a lot of us, I'm sure some of you have faced rejection, which means you submit to a journal, the article comes back with a few comments from the editor, probably saying that it does not fall within the aims and scope, or you should look for some other journal, etc. So why is it? And if you look at the rejection rate in the industry, it is close to 85 to 90%. If we could understand what is going on in an editor's mind, what are the priorities of editors in general, we probably can take a better decision on how to write our paper, how to choose our journal, right? And then these metrics will come into the picture. So what are the things that an editor actually looks for when he or she reads a research article submitted to the journal? So based on our discussion with our editors, this is what we have summarized. First, the article should be scientifically correct, which means that it should not be an isolated piece of research. It should have some connection to the past, right? It should be built upon previously proven research. Next, it should report something new, which means there should be an element of novelty about your paper. And not only new, but it has to be significant as well, which means that your research, the finding that you have in that paper, your results should have an impact to the society in some way or the other. It could be a short term, a long term, a direct or an indirect, but there has to be some sort of impact. Then the main thing that the article should be of interest to the readers. Again, this is extremely important, because at the end of the day, it's the readers or the audience of a journal that define the success of that particular journal, right? So it is very important that when we choose journals, one of our criteria should always be understanding the audience. Who is going to read this article? Because the audience are the ones that are going to cite the papers and give it the desired recognition that it deserves. Now, having understood what the editors want, there are a few things that the editor do not like at all. So first, topic not trending, not impactful. Again, something that the editor is really interested in, to publish articles that are impactful, that are trending, which means it will attract more visibility, more readability, and hence more citations. Then too many language errors, which means that the article is not properly written. There are grammatical mistakes. The editor, halfway through the article, the editor loses interest because he's not able to virtually understand. Then too many or irrelevant self-citations. Now, self-citations is a debatable topic. Can we self-cite? We can. Self-cite means citing your own paper. Yeah, you can. But if you irrelevantly cite your paper just because you want to get a citation on your paper, the editor is smart enough to figure that out. And, irrelevant self-citations come under unethical practices. Now, if there is anything unethical about a paper, the editor simply would want to reject it and not want to go further. Then poor geographical distribution of citations, which means the editor wants to see that you are citing articles from different parts of the globe. And it's not just that your citations are very localized to one country, one city, one location. Then recent or older articles not cited, which means that the editor wants to see that you are reading the right content. You are reading older as well as latest contents, which tells him or her that you have done a good literature review. And last, but definitely not the least, that leading scientists and top journal articles not cited. So again, it is extremely important that that you are reading the content from the right sources. By right sources, I mean top scientists, top journal articles, top institutions. All this again goes into the I would say evaluation of editors, right? Now, what do you find in these 10 points? What did the editor do? Editor for himself designed a few metrics based on which he will take a decision. Again, it all boils down to some sort of metrics. But again, see, if you look at these 10 points, not all points are directly related to metrics. There are elements of judgment. There are elements of, I would say, preferences by the editor as well, right? So it's a good mix of metrics as well as human judgment. And this is what metrics is all about. Now, why do you think metrics are so important in today's world? Because of the growing industry. It's huge nowadays. If you look at the publication output of the world from 1996 to 2020, it is growing at a very fast pace. There are more than 6,000 scientific journal publishers, more than 45,000 peer-reviewed scholarly journals, more than 3 million articles published every year, contributed by 4 million unique authors. So you see, it is because of these huge numbers that there is a requirement of evaluation and metrics. So again, first, I think we should start from the basics and try and understand what actually is a research output. So I've talked about growth in research output, but what is research output? So if you look at research output from the eyes of a researcher or people from the academic background, research output may include a lot of things. And if you look at 56% of the people actually talk about original articles being research output, but it also includes thesis, books, conference papers, patents, government documents, book chapters, review, and much more, right? So it's not just original research articles. It is much more beyond that. In fact, there are 67 types of research output that exist. Now, to evaluate these output and come to a conclusion that can be used for various, I would say, evidence-based evaluations, right? It is very important to have research metrics behind these output. Now, research metrics can be used for a variety of purposes, right? First of all, I would say overall, it is very important part of the evaluation landscape, right? Now, evaluation can be for an author, can be for an institute, can be for a country, can be for a region, right? Can be for a group of institutions like a consortium. So it applies everywhere. And mostly you would see that universities and funders, they decide their funding, they decide their decisions based on metrics, because there has to be a standard way of evaluating people or evaluating departments, right? First of all, metrics helps to analyze and identify strengths and weaknesses at a particular institute. Next, it also helps the management take a decision on where to invest. Also, it also gives them an idea about the return on investment. Like if they find that one particular department is doing really well, and if they invest more, they are going to get better quality and better output from that department. So those kind of decisions. Then it also helps in rewards and recognition, where it helps the institute identify the rising stars, the people who are contributing the most to quality and quantity. And overall, it helps the institute develop a good narrative about the institute, right? So maybe the director has to present about the institute somewhere. If there are metrics, he will be able to better present his submission or results. So overall, research metrics help demonstrate impact, right? Now, impact can be of different types. It can be an educational impact where, they talk about library holdings or views of that institute videos somewhere. It can be a societal impact where you talk about news mentions, clinical citations, government policies, etc. It can be a commercial impact where you talk about patent citations, industry collaboration, licenses, business consultancy activities, etc. Then there can be innovation impact, where you can mention the number of patents filed and granted. Informational impact, which talks about Wikipedia citations, blog mentions, basically social media impact. Then you have academic impact, where you talk about downloads, citations, measurable, I would say, metrics. Then promotion, so impact around rewards and recognition, right? Where you can talk about the social media impact, as well as the visibility of the institute as well. So research metrics are extremely important to create an overall impact at every institute. Now, metrics can be of different types, right? So if I talk about from the researcher's point of view, we'll be talking about three very specific kinds of metrics. One, researcher level metrics, right? Next, you have article level metrics and journal level metrics. So researcher level metrics is more or less based around number of documents published and the H-index. We have article level metrics, which has several, you can see there are several metrics mentioned, and these are from different platforms. But majorly we talk about, in terms of article, we talk about number of citations or citations per paper, FWCI, which is field weighted citation impact. We are going to learn more about these metrics in the upcoming slides. And then there is also the social media impact. Then we have journal level metrics, which include several metrics. I'm sure some of you are very familiar with impact factor, but there is a world beyond impact factor as well. And there are a lot of metrics that go beyond impact factor and tell you different aspects about a particular journal. So let us start with journal metrics and help you understand how these journal metrics work and what are the different kinds of metrics. So as I said, the first thing when we talk about journal metrics that comes to your mind is impact factor. On your screens, you can see the calculation of impact factor, how it is calculated. It is usually calculated for 2 years or 5 years, right? So you can have a 2-year impact factor or a 5-year impact factor. Now, if you look at it in a very simple way, it means citations per publication, right? Generic meaning is citation per publication over a period of time, which means that it is highly driven by number of citations, right? Now, when you are comparing two journals in the same core subject area, impact factor is perfect. It gives you a very good comparison and it tells you which journal is better than the other. Only when you are comparing two journals from the same core subject area. As I said, research nowadays has become more and more multidisciplinary, and more journals are publishing multidisciplinary content. And therefore, it is becoming increasingly difficult to compare journals across different subject areas, comparing journals from multidisciplinary subject areas, and using impact factor to compare such journals is very challenging. And therefore, there is requirement of alternative metrics. Not only these, impact factor has some other, I would say, limitations as well. First of all journals do not have impact factor. And when I say all journals, I mean some very good upcoming journals still do not have impact factor. And because of that, a lot of times they are usually neglected. Now, what happens is institutes have laid down rules like you need to publish 2 documents in Scopus Index journal, you need to publish 2 documents in impact factor journals. And that is why, it creates some sort of bias at times, right? Then conference proceedings are not considered for impact factor. So you won't find pure conference proceedings being considered for impact factor. So, people working in the field of computer science, where 80 to 90% of the research is published in the form of conference papers, generally they are the ones that are, affected by this particular policy. And then impact factor is sometimes biased towards fast moving subject areas as compared to slow moving subject areas. Now, what do I mean by this? If you look at the calculation, it is highly driven by number of citations, right? And fast moving subject areas means subjects like chemistry, subject like life sciences, where there are a lot of citations that people can expect, right? So the more the number of citations, the higher chances of a better impact factor. But and the simple answer to this is a simple example to this is you will find several journals with impact factor more than 50, 20, 30, 40, 50 in the field of life sciences or chemistry. But can you expect the same for mathematics, for example, or any other social sciences subject area? Probably not, because it is not getting cited as quickly as or as heavily as the other subject area. And therefore, you can never compare multidisciplinary journals effectively or cross-disciplinary journals efficiently. So therefore, there is an increased need of alternative metrics. Now, the first alternative metric that I'm going to talk about is CiteScore. Now, CiteScore is a freely available metric on the Scopus platform. So anyone, even though you don't have access to Scopus, you can still go to the Scopus platform and find out the CiteScore of journals. Now, CiteScore is based on three principles. First, it is comprehensive, as it is based on the world's largest abstract and citation database of peer-reviewed literature, Scopus. It is clear and transparent because you can calculate it yourself, and it is current, which means there is a tracker that tracks the performance of journals on a monthly basis. Now, this is really important because there are several journals that lie, at the edge of being removed from Scopus, or in the lowest quartile, which is Q4. We are going to talk about quartiles as well. So journals on Scopus are divided into quartiles, quartile 1, quartile 2, based on their metrics as well as their performance. So basically, the journals that lie in the fourth quartile, the lowest quartile, for them, monthly metrics is really important, because you don't want to publish in a fourth quartile journal that is decreasing on quality month on month, because that ensures, or that is confirmation that that journal is going to be removed going forward, as it already lies in the fourth quartile and it is declining on quality. So it is very important to be very aware of these metrics on a regular basis. Now, impact factor is an annual metric. It's not a monthly metric, right? Now, if you look at 2020, CiteScore 2020, as I said, not all journals have impact factor. There are more than 13,000 titles that have CiteScore, but no impact factor. And out of this, I would say 655 or more journals are very highly ranked in their respective subject areas, which tells you, reinforces the fact that some very good journals still do not have impact factor, right? Then you have the source normalized impact per paper, which is SNIP, right? Which is actually a metric that is used to compare two journals from two different subject areas. So the example that I gave you from chemistry and mathematics, you can easily compare any journal, any such journals across different subject areas using SNIP, right? So SNIP will be basically normalizing the subject area and then telling you which journal is better than the other journal, right? So what it does, it basically normalizes. When I say normalizes the subject area, what do I mean? I mean that it basically analyzes how fast moving a field is and how slow moving a field is, puts them on one single parameter, and then helps you understand which journal has better impact, right? So now you can compare a mathematics journal with a chemistry journal and confidently say which journal is better, right? Then the next metrics is SCImago Journal Ranking, or SJR. Some of you might have heard about SCImago as well. So SCImago, it measures the scientific influence of journals, which means it not only takes into account the number of citations, but also the source of citations. So it basically measures where the citations are coming from. Are they coming from a top author? Is the citation coming from a top institute? I think if the citation is coming from a patent, that gives the citation more weightage, and SJR calculates exactly that, right? So when you talk about SJR, it measures prestige over popularity, right? It tells you how prestigious a journal is, which is the journal most preferred by top authors, by top institutes, by top journal articles, etc. Now, we've learned about 4 different metrics. The big question is which one to use when. So when you talk about that, there are an array of journal metrics that complement journal performance as well. So you can actually put them on a table, and based on your end in mind. So the first thing is, all of you should have an end in mind, what you want to achieve out of this journal selection. That will help you decide which metrics is important to you. For example, if you're looking for a current metric, go for CiteScore Tracker. If you're looking for prestige over popularity, go for SJR, right? So different choices, different objectives will help you choose different metrics. Now, I was talking about Scopus quartile. So this is how Scopus journal quartile look like. So when you go on Scopus and you click on sources, on the left-hand side, you will find quartiles. Now, what are these quartiles? First quartile is top 25% journals. Second quartile is 25 to 50%. And these are actually categorized on the basis of their performance and quality. So it is always said that whenever you are choosing journals, your first preference should always be quartile 1, quartile 2. If you are unable to publish in quartile 1, quartile 2, then you should go for quartile 3. But if you are publishing in a quartile 4 journal, you should be very careful and you should do extra analysis. And that's where the month-on-month metric, which is called CiteScore Tracker, will really come into the picture. This will help you track the performance of this journal month on month. Is it going up? Is it going down? If it's going up, you are still safe. If it's going down, it's highly risky. And it's quite predictable that the journal will be removed from Scopus going forward. So make sure that you make the right choice. Now, journal selection can be quite intimidating and confusing at times. So I have basically narrowed down 7 points for you that will help you take the right decision on how to choose journals based on several parameters, not just metrics. So as I said, it's not always about metrics, right? So what are these 7 questions? If you are able to answer these 7 questions for every journal, you will be able to take the right decision on which journal to choose to read and to publish your research article in. So the first question is the manuscript right fit for the journal? Which means what you need to do to get answer to this question, you need to check the aims and scope of the journal. You need to read the latest articles to find out the current interest of the journal, and also read the aims and scope to find out what kind of articles it publishes, what are the subject areas, the exact domain that it is preferable by the journal, etc. Right? Next question, are there any funder or institution mandates to consider? So you need to be very clear about what your institute wants, what your funding agency wants. So let's say your institute says that you need to have at least two Scopus Index publications, which will narrow down your search to only Scopus Index journals, right? Or your funder says that you need to publish in open access journals. So you need to only focus on the open access journals and leave everything else. So this will again help you filter out your choices. Then, is the journal visible in the communities you want to reach? Now, again, I come back to the same point. Don't run after metrics only. Try and find out the right audience, the right home for your research article. Then, is there a reasonable chance of acceptance? Now, this is self-evaluation step, right? All of us subconsciously know that what are the chances of getting published in a particular journal, right? So, we are often attracted by journals that have high impact factors, that have high metrics, and we often get, I would say, driven towards such journals. But you should also realize that such journals often have the highest rejection rate. Now, this does not mean that you should not try and get published in those journals. It simply means that it is only worth investing your time submitting to such journals if you are completely confident that your article completely aligns with all the requirements of that journal. At times we try to skip a few points. We try to overlook a few points that, okay, we can leave this. This probably is not that important. But no, for an editor, whatever they have mentioned in the aims and scope is extremely important, because that will define the boundaries within which the journal publishes, which defines the audience that is going to read that particular journal. So be very careful when you are choosing journals and do a good self-evaluation. Next, is the journal indexed in relevant databases? So as I said, some of you may trust Scopus, some of you may trust Web of Science or some other platforms, UGC CARE list. So whatever is the list that you are interested in or you are confident with, you can actually try and find out which is the best one for you, and then take the right decision on how to choose the right journal. Then the next point is, what do the journal metrics reveal? Which means that now comes metrics. So you see, when you are doing an evaluation of journals, journal metrics come at point number 6. So this is really important to understand that it's not only metrics, it's about other things as well. It's about other points of judgment. It's about other things. So metrics only complements your judgment. So journal metrics, again, simple answer to this: don't rely on one metric. Always try and find out a combination of metrics that will give you the right answer, that will give you a holistic view of that journal and will help you take the right decision. And then last but definitely not the least, is the journal reputable and practices robust peer review? So again, when you choose any journal, please do not fall prey to predatory journals just because you want a faster publications. There are no journals, hardly any journals, that can publish your article within 24 hours or 48 hours, right? So be very careful. The only objective of predatory journals is to earn money. So the first step is to understand whether the journal is asking for money. Take a step back, then reevaluate that journal, whether the money, whether that journal, if it's a gold open access journal, which means that it will charge an APC to publish your article, or if it's just a predatory journal, which is just looking for the money to publish your article as well. So make sure that you are doing the right analysis at your end. You are clearly differentiating between predatory journals, gold open access journals, etc., and not falling for faster publication times. So again, 7 questions. If you can answer this for every journal, you can be more confident about your journal selection. Moving on to author level metrics. Now, author level metrics can be defined in a number of ways. Again, the most common one being H-index, right? So first thing is number of documents published or number of citations received. These are pure numbers. But then there is a metric which is globally accepted, that is called H-index. Now, what is H-index? If I say H-index of an author is 20, what does it mean? It means that of all the paper that author has published, at least 20 papers have received at least 20 citations. This is the way H-index is interpreted. Now, H-index can be found on Scopus as well as on Google Scholar. And often you will see that the Google Scholar H-index is higher than the Scopus H-index. So there are a number of reasons behind this. First, Scopus only indexes the most trusted peer-reviewed journals. So it's a peer-reviewed platform. Currently close to 26,000 journals are indexed on Scopus. Whereas Google Scholar, first of all, it's not a peer-reviewed platform. It is an open source platform. It includes not only journals, but also academic websites, gray literature, preprints, thesis, etc. It also includes books from the Google Books project, and results are often duplicates of the same article, preprints and postprints, and due to which the number of sources are inflated and you find an inflated H-index at times. Now, the big question is, which one should you consider? So my answer to this question is the one that the evaluating agency is looking for. So for example, you're going for an interview, and in the interview, they ask for your H-index. You need to be very clear about which H-index are they talking about. They may mean Scopus H-index or Google Scholar H-index, and whatever they want, you need to demonstrate that as only. But which is usually the most preferred one? If you look at the global industry, the most preferred metric, the most preferred platform is Scopus. That includes top ranking agencies like QS, THE, Shanghai Rankings, and many, many more. So author level metrics, while there are several metrics, but H-index is something which is quite popular and very well accepted by the research community as well. Then we come to the next level of metrics, which is article level metrics. Now, how are articles evaluated? Articles are usually traditionally evaluated on the basis of number of citations or, number of citations. Now, number of citations are impacted by what? By time period. So if an article is published in 1990, another article is published in 2020, the article published back then has more chances and more time to get cited. So invariably, you might see that the articles published previously receive more citations. But again, this is a generic thing. There are exceptions. There are a lot of cases where an article published in 2021 has higher number of citations to any other article published in 1990. Why is that? Have you ever thought, why is that? The simple answer is it's all about impact. How impactful, how interesting that article is. Maybe that particular article published in 1990, it's something which is a little basic and it gives direction to a particular research, right? But the article published in 2021 is a more practical approach, and it gives, it is more result oriented. So maybe, people find it more interesting to cite, and therefore you will see these kind of things going forward. So what is important is impact. How do you measure impact? Again, you need metrics, right? So you cannot only judge articles based on number of citations. So what's the alternative metric? FWCI, or field weighted citation impact. Now from the full form, you can easily understand. Field weighted means subject area normalized, and citation impact means impact of citations, not number of citations, impact of citations. So every article on Scopus published after 1995 carries an FWCI value. Now, FWCI, it is measured on a scale where the number 1 is considered to be global world average. Anything below 1 is below world average. Anything above 1 is above world average. So 1.2 is 20% above world average. That means world average quality. So FWCI is one of the most commonly used metrics nowadays to define the quality of articles. But along with it, there is also coexists a metric which is called PlumX metrics. Now, what are PlumX metrics? These are the metrics that capture the social media impact of any article. See, in today's world, social media is very impactful. And a lot of times, the popularity of an article on social media often defines its future success. So how do you measure the social media impact? So PlumX metrics does exactly that. It captures Facebook shares, Twitter tweets, LinkedIn shares and likes, Wikipedia mentions, news mentions, blog mentions. So all this social media activity is tracked by PlumX metrics, and you get a clear idea about a recently published article that may not have received a lot of citations, or you are not able to see the right impact at the moment. But then if you look at the social media statistics, you can be a little confident that this article is growing on popularity and may receive more number of citations going forward. So that will help you take the right decision on whether to choose that article to cite or not, right? Now, coming back to the golden rule of choosing research metrics, as I said, there is not one metric alone that can completely give you the correct answer. So there are two golden rules that we say when you use research metrics, and these can be used to give you a balanced, multidimensional view. Number one, always use both qualitative and quantitative input into your decisions. So either one will not give you the right, right output or right insights. So let's say one research scholar or one author has published 20 articles. Another scholar has published 10 articles. So if you only consider, number or quantity, the one publishing 20 articles, probably you would think that that author is really doing well. On the other way, you saw that the author that published 20 articles has received 100 citations in total, which gives him a citation per publication of 5. Whereas the author that published 10 articles has got 1,000 citations, which gives him a citation per publication of 10. So now, as soon as you add another metric, you get a different view of that particular field. So this is why multiple metrics are really important in order to give you a right view of any particular author, institute, or article, right? Basically, the second rule says always use more than one research metric as the quantitative output. So you should never consider only one metric as quantitative output. So there should be different ways, because see, there are different ways of becoming excellent. There is not one way that you can be called a genius or an excellent, right? It can be different things. It can be the societal impact. It can be number of patents. It can be number of research articles, multiple things. So both these points complement each other, and you need to have a right balance between the two. Next, importance of using multiple metrics. So this is an example that tells you why it is important to use multiple metrics. And this is an example of a particular institute. So an institute can have an FWCI value as well, overall FWCI quality, or it can have citation per publication. So when I look at FWCI, it is 2.53. And as I said, 1 is global world average. So the quality is 2.5 times the quality of world average, which is very high, right? And the other metrics is citation per publication, which is 27.8. So it gives you a larger number. Now, how they complement each other? So number one, field weighted citation is a more popular metric because it takes into account many variables. And it often compensates for differences in subject area. Like, as I said, it's subject area normalized. Then article types, let's say review articles versus original research articles. And it also builds a benchmark that this is something, the FWCI of 1 is global world average. So there is a benchmark to it. Now, FWCI has some disadvantages, like it's a smaller number, and sometimes people don't understand smaller numbers, right? It's difficult to interpret because you don't exactly know what does 2.53 exactly mean, right? It is just giving you a scale. Therefore, when you use another quantitative metric like citation per publication, it compensates for these weaknesses. And we are able to get a more complete picture and a more reliable picture, right? So always make sure that you choose the right metric, the right set of metrics, and such metrics that complement the weaknesses of each other. So now the big question, do metrics help? So I've highlighted three important points here in the list. First, the question that is, should it be about metrics only, or should we not consider any metrics? So my answer is that it's not a black and white situation. As I said, metrics aren't a replacement for human judgment. They basically complement your judgment. So you need metrics to back up your insights, to be more confident with your insights, and to develop a narrative that can actually, communicate the impact of your overall submission. And to do this, you need to first frame the questions that you want to answer. And once you have framed the questions, once you have developed the end in mind, you will be in a better position to choose the right metrics to define your particular problem, right? And again, follow the golden rule. Always use more than one quantitative metric, and always use a qualitative and a quantitative metrics both. So this will actually fulfill your needs. Now, if you look if you look at the academic industry, there are several arguments, and some of the arguments go against metrics as well, right? And I want to highlight some of them. So some of the arguments are, greater use of metrics will lead to gaming by researchers, which means that it's like a game, it's like a video game. I want to come first, right? And then sometimes people say that metrics aren't suitable for humanities. And the reason simple that I gave you, that for them, the metrics that they are considering, they are probably more heavily biased towards number of citations, which is not a strength of the humanities field. And then metrics risk perpetuating biases such as gender bias. Now, I have prepared some arguments, some counter arguments against these. So the first argument, which says greater use of metrics will lead to gaming by researchers. Now, the thing is, if you look at the positive side of this, well selected metrics, they usually drive positive behaviors. If you are able to correctly choose the right metric and give an overview, it will lead to positive behaviors. Like, let's say, different ranking agencies, we'll come to a slide later on, different ranking agencies have different ways of evaluating an institute. If you are able to correctly point out which metric you are lagging in, you can enforce certain things in the institute that will bring changes to that will improve that particular factor, and then improve your overall ranking. So a good choice of metrics definitely leads to positive behaviors. And then when you say metrics leads to gaming, if I use multiple metrics, it makes the gaming very hard, right? You can't always keep up with all the metrics, right? So the more number of documents you publish, to compensate the citation per publication, the more number of citations you will need, right? So an author publishing fewer but better quality articles will have a higher impact and a higher citation per publication. So it's always very difficult to keep up with multiple metrics. And then metrics plus peer review and expert opinion will definitely detect if there is any kind of gaming going on. So metrics are the, I would say, again, I'm repeating myself, metrics are like the backbone that complement human judgment. Then the next argument, which says metrics aren't suitable for as compared to subject areas like medicine or chemistry. But you should be aware that the current changing environment has also led to a lot of data sources covering humanities to become more complete and comprehensive. And now you will see that, for example, on the Scopus database, maximum number of journals are from the social sciences domain. And not many of you know this, but this is a fact that most of the journals on, so the maximum number of journals on Scopus is from the social sciences domain. So there are more and more sources that are becoming complete and acceptable. And research metrics now are relevant for humanities research as well, because there are normalized metrics that exist and that can easily compare researches going on in the field of humanities with the medical industry as well. So normalizing subject area can easily tell you which industry is growing faster, right? And then biases. But that is again an argument that it may increase bias. But metrics actually helps eliminate bias. So if you are using only one metric, it creates bias. But if you are using multiple metrics, it compensates for the biases and gives you an unbiased decision. And these metrics, these unbiased metrics, reflect researchers' activity as a whole. They don't take into consideration gender, institute, performance, etc. It measures all researchers on one single platform. Now, having understood these arguments, where are research metrics used? So if you look around, first of all, in national assessments. So very commonly you will find, research metrics being used in the national assessments as well, right? And there are a lot of assessment agencies across the globe, like the ERA in China, the Ministry of Education in China, ERA in Australia, Ministry of Education in China, NRF in South Africa, RAE from Hong Kong, and there are many more across the globe that use metrics. In fact, NAC also uses some sort of metrics to define the quality or to grade an institute as A+, A++, B+, right? So they have their own set of metrics as well. So metrics are everywhere, right? And then they are also used in rankings, and we are very aware of it. And if you look at the top 3 global ranking bodies, Times Higher Education, QS, Shanghai Rankings, you see they have different metrics. And this is what I was talking about. Different evaluating agencies have different metrics, and they are using this combination to eliminate bias and give you an unbiased platform, a platform where everyone can be treated the same, everyone can be evaluated on the same parameters, and therefore give you a more logical reasoning about the performance indicators, right? So make sure that you are using the right metrics and you are aligned with the evaluating agency that you are targeting. To read more about the research metrics, we have a guide that can be found online, a research metrics guidebook that defines each of these metrics and many more that exist in the industry in detail. Now, before I close the session, there are 2 important things that I would bring to the notice of everyone who is into research. First, ORCID. It is very important and extremely essential to have a unique ID like ORCID with you. ORCID is the full form is Open Researcher and Contributor ID. It's a non-proprietary alphanumeric code, and each one of you can create an ORCID for yourself. Please do so if you already haven't created one for yourself. What does ORCID do? ORCID actually helps you in getting a unique identity so that your name is not misunderstood with somebody else's name who has a similar name as yours. So once I was giving a PMT examination where in the same room, my name is Vishal Gupta, there were 36 other Vishal Guptas. So if that is confusing, then it is very confusing for Scopus because it encounters a larger sample size. So to make sure that your article is indexed under your name, you should have an ORC ID. You should associate your ORC ID with Scopus ID. And nowadays, ORC ID is also integrated with Google Scholar and other platforms. So it is good that you have an ORC ID. And whenever you submit an article, please mention your ORC ID as well, so that your article is tagged to that ORC ID and respectively to the other databases like Google Scholar, Scopus, etc. And then we have a free Elsevier Researcher Academy. So friends, this is a platform. This is a unique platform that Elsevier has developed, and it is getting very popular during the lockdown period. It's a free platform for learning, right? So researchers, faculty, anyone can go to this platform, create an ID password for themselves, and start taking up relevant courses for you that can help you in your self-development. There are important courses on the platform like finding the right journal, book writing, how to write a book, how to write an article, what are the fundamentals of publishing, how to become a peer reviewer if you are interested to become a peer reviewer. And these are all certified courses. Once you complete a course, you can self-generate a certificate for yourself that you can keep with you, and you can do these courses at your own time. So these are self-paced courses. And you will find some of the interesting courses like how to write a book, how to find the right journal. And this is how the platform basically looks like. And there are many, many more courses that you can take, right? With this, I would just like to say that Elsevier is there to support researchers at every stage. Please feel free to reach out to us in case you need any kind of support. Be happy to support the research community. Thank you so much for your time. I hope this session was useful. I will now take up some questions if you do have any.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for your compelling lecture on the research metrics. Yes, of course, we have received some questions from the participants. Let me take one by one.
Sure, sir.
Yeah, Ms. Meenakshi is a research scholar. She asked something like, see, once again. Yeah, whether it is necessary to have the animal activities to get published in a paper.
Animal activities to get published. See, again, I would say if there is a journal that exists that is interested to publish such content, and by reading the latest articles or the latest trends, you find or you feel that this topic is really interesting and it will fetch desired number of citations or recognition, and it is ultimately going to help you as a researcher, why not? I mean, it's all about finding the right journal, finding the right audience for your article, right? And the question, like, is it necessary? It all depends upon the topic. I mean, I'm not sure what you're trying to ask, but what I can say is that if you can find the right home for your article, the right audience, it is going to fetch the desired number of citations in form of recognition for you.
Okay. The another question is, what is the difference between conference proceedings and an edited book?
Okay, so they're very different. A conference proceeding is basically, there is a conference and they have invited publications and they are associated with a journal. So they will publish the accepted papers that they probably asked to present during the conference. They will peer review it and they will publish it in the proceedings of that particular conference. So these are conference proceedings simply. Then there is an edited book, which is completely different. So you could actually contribute with book chapters, or you can contribute with the overall book to be published. So they are very different. And you talk about weightage. So I understand what you're trying to ask. You are trying to ask metrics and how they are impacted. So if you talk about Scopus indexed, so let's say somebody is asking about how many Scopus indexed publications you have. That will include conference proceedings. That will include books or book chapters as well. So it's all about, as I said, it's all about who is evaluating you and what kind of answers is he or she expecting. You need to understand that and then answer accordingly. These metrics will be there to help you to complement your narration. So you can use it accordingly. I hope this answers your question.
Yes. The another question is, if somebody takes any course in Researcher Academy that is provided by Elsewhere, like the course on certified peer reviewer, will they be able to have a certified peer reviewer against their name?
See, you have a certificate from Elsevier Researcher Academy that you have completed this course. So, and this course is not easy, let me tell you. So this is like a proper, a paid course that you get, right? This is equivalently tough to such courses. So it's not easy, first, number one, to do a certified peer reviewer course. If you do complete it and you do generate a certificate for yourself, it is worth showcasing. And you can mention that you have done a certified peer reviewer course from the Researcher Academy. I mean, definitely displaying on LinkedIn and definitely goes on to your profile as well, right? And more than just getting a certificate, it gives you valuable information and insights on how better you can become a good peer reviewer, right? And once you have done this course, you actually come into the pool where, Elsevier, if in the future they are looking for peer reviewers in a particular field, they might contact you or consider your name as well, right?
Another question is, when an article is published in the year 2020, and if it is removed in 2021, what will be the status of that article?
I was expecting this question, and if it wasn't answered, I would have myself raised this. So it's a very good question. What happens to an article that is published in a journal which was indexed in 2020 and removed in 2021? So let me make one thing very clear. If you publish in a journal that is currently indexed in Scopus, and when you publish it, that journal is still indexed, and you see your article there once your article is published, that article will always remain Scopus indexed. So it's not the journal per se which is indexed as a whole. It is the journal and the time period that matters. So if a journal is indexed from 2019 to 2020, all articles published during that period will be indexed on Scopus. If the journal is removed after 2021, the articles published in 1920 will remain on Scopus and will be considered as Scopus indexed publications. The day it is removed from Scopus, from that day, no publications will be considered as Scopus indexed. I hope this answers your question.
Yes, sir. And one of the participants wants to know that how to collaborate and publish the conference proceedings in Elsewhere's material today's proceeding.
So, see, how to publish your proceedings. So these proceedings usually call for papers. They take out call for papers. You can respond to them. You can go to their website and find more information about when they usually do that. So you can get an idea about the same. So yeah, so that is the answer. You just need to be aware about when these journals or proceedings they call for papers, right?
And is there any tips from your end to increase the citation count?
Any tips to increase the citation count? So see, if you ask me, let's do a back calculation. Which articles do you think get more citations? Articles that are, that have a trending topic, that have an interesting topic, that that has an impact to the society. It is published in the right journal, which means that the audience is correct. You are not publishing. So let me give you an example. There are two journals that publish cancer-related topics. Okay, one journal publishes only medical field, which is surgery, the technicalities of medicine, etc. Another journal, which is also a cancer-related journal, but it talks about psychology of patients. Now, do you think both these journals are relevant for any topic of cancer? No. So for you as a researcher, it is extremely important to find out the relevant journal that talks about a specific domain. Now, this example that I gave you is a very simple example, right? But there are technicalities within, let's say, if you talk about the medical field, there may be one journal talking about one approach, one journal talking about another approach. So you should be very clear which journal you have chosen and does it complement your writing as well. And then another way of improving number of citations is to improve the visibility of your paper. How can you improve the visibility? So you can promote your article. So do you think there is any product in the market currently that is successful without marketing? Probably no. So a research article that you write is your product and you need to market it accordingly. And by market, I mean promote it. So a simple link, if you can just paste it on LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter with a brief about the topic that this is your current publication, it goes a long way in promoting your article to a wider audience, right? The more people read, the more people view your article, there are more chances of you getting cited. If you just take an example, if you write a paper and you put it beside your desk, do you think you will get citations? No. You need to put it out there. You need to make sure that it reaches out to the right audience. How can you do that? Number one, choose the right journal. Very important. Number two, use social media to promote your own article, right? Both this together will help you improve the visibility, readability, and finally, number of citations.
Yes, sir. Thank you. The next question is, where to get the current list of Scopus indexed journals?
Okay, so I can actually show you that. So where to get the current list of Scopus index journal? Give me a moment.
Yes.
Sir, let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, yes, visible.
So this is the Scopus homepage. Let me go back to the homepage so that you are able to understand. So this is the Scopus homepage. Now, if you have access to Scopus, you will get a view like this. If you don't have access, there'll be a different view, but these will remain common on top. So all you need to do is click on sources. And then you can download the Excel sheet, the current Excel sheet. Now keep in mind that Scopus evaluates this journal twice every year. So twice every year, the list is changed. Few journals are discontinued, few are added. So you can actually download the Scopus source list from this particular tab. Download this portion, download source titles only. You download this. This is a comprehensive list with subject areas, with site score, with SNIP, SJR, publisher name, everything. And then it has a tab which says active and inactive. You only need to filter the active tab. That will give you the active list of journals. There is also another tab just beside it which says discontinued list. So that also you need to take care. Check the discontinued list first if the journal is discontinued or not. Now, there was also another question that I saw related to this, which was, how can you confirm whether a journal will remain Scopus indexed or not? And how do you find out that there are chances of it being de-indexed? So if you look on the left-hand side, there are quartiles. This is top 10% journals. First quartile is top 25%. Second quartile is 25 to 50%. Third is 50 to 75. And fourth is the bottom 25. So we always suggest that your first criteria should always be top 10%, first quartile, second quartile. So top 50% journals. So top 50% journals have the most chances of staying indexed, right? Now coming to the third quartile and fourth quartile. Third quartile, I would say, again, more or less confident, but again, these have a high chances of moving to the fourth quartile as well. So you should be extra cautious. The more caution that you need to take is with the fourth quartile journals, right? So if you look at the fourth quartile journals, let me just click here and apply. So it will only show me the fourth quartile journals. Now, these are all the fourth quartile journals. Okay, they have a site score of 2. Let me just open one randomly. Now, what do I see here? That this journal's current site score is 2. SJR is 0.143, again, lower than world average. SNIP is 0.13, lower than world average. So all the metrics are not very encouraging, right? Now, can you see here? It tells you The site score in 2020, which is an annual metric, is 2. But what was the site score in 2019? Just check, 2.6. So it has declined, right? What was the site score is 2018? 3.2. So continuously, year on year, the site score is declining, number one. So that is why this journal is now in Q4. But where will it go from now? Will it be removed? Will it remain indexed? Check the current. The current site score is 1.2. This is for this month, updated till August, right? Now check in the next month. Is it going up, going down? Then in the next month, this will give you an idea whether a journal will remain indexed or it is going further down, which means it will be removed from Scopus ultimately. Okay. So this is how you can actually take a decision. And then you can also check the rank here. So based on the field, so this is in the field of catalysis. Out of 57 journals in this field, this journal ranks 47, which again tells you that this may not survive for long. And then the top journals are right here. So you can also focus on these journals rather than focusing on the journals below, right? I hope this answers your question.
Yes, sir. Yeah, another question is, sometimes there will be a different details with respect to the journal coverage. So in the website, the coverage of the journal is like 1995 to 2021. But when the details of the same journal is downloaded in the Excel, the coverage details will be completely different. So why it happens?
So a good question again. So when I say, let's say for this journal, sir, I hope you can see my screen on Scopus homepage.
Yes, yes.
So for the same journal, see the coverage year is 2013 to present. Now, there could be a chance that this journal has been removed from Scopus. Okay, that is why it is essential to check the discontinued list. And why it is showing present? Because there is content from 2021 that is still indexed. So this journal may be de-indexed in July or April. So anything published before that remains Scopus indexed. Anything published after that will not remain Scopus indexed. So you should take care. You should look at the discontinued list and then take a right decision. So always just don't look here. Also look at the discontinued list to find out whether a journal is indexed currently or not. So this will help you, right? Again, I hope this answers your question.
Yes, sir. Correct. And one more question from the participant is, sometimes the institution name is not listed under the affiliation search.
So, sir, not all institutes have their name listed, or there is a Scopus profile that is created or not, right? So in that case, if you still want to look at the number of documents, so what you can do, you can come to document search here. You can select affiliation from here and then write the name of your institute, right? So let's say I am generally just writing a random name. Okay. So let's say Sushant University. Okay. And I click on search. So see, it is based on this name, it is giving me 2 documents for this particular institute, right? But these 2 documents may still not be correct. You can, what you can do, you can go to this affiliation search here, click here. Sorry. Yeah. So let's say Sushant University, click on the 2 documents here. So there is an affiliation that is created. See, this is view Sushant University's affiliation. I click here. This will open the Sushant University's affiliation, but it has an affiliation ID starting from 1, which means this is a sub ID. There is not a main ID that has been created. How does a main ID look like? It starts with 6 and it looks like, let's say if an ID is created, like University of Delhi, right? You will see an ID starting with 600. So this will tell you that the main ID has been created. So if you wish to create an ID for your institute, just write an email to scopussupport@elsevier.com. I repeat, scopussupport@elsevier.com, mentioning the name of your institute and the possible IDs. So you should do a basic search yourself. This is the name of the institute. These are the documents. Request you to please create a profile, and they will create a profile for your institute. Or you can contact any Elsevier executive and or me or anyone, and we can help you out, right? Again, I hope this answers your question.
Yes, sir. The next question is, some of the journals with good impact factor are not yet indexed in Scopus. What is the reason behind it?
See, the same thing goes for the other indexing platform as well, right? There are a lot of good journals not indexed in UGC care list also. UGC care list also keeps on removing, adding journals, right? So these lists, these platforms are dynamic, and every platform have their own benchmarking. I may categorize a journal as good. Google Scholar or UGC may not find it good because it does not fit their quality standards. Everyone has a different quality standard. What you need to realize is what is globally accepted. When the world looks at data, finding data, where will they go, right? And now, not 9 out of 10 times the answer is Scopus. So that is why having Scopus indexed publications is important, because it directly impacts QS rankings, THE rankings, NIRF rankings as well, because NIRF also considers Scopus as one of the databases. So, it all boils down to how you are being viewed, where you are being viewed, and who is viewing you from where. So that is why, and again, to answer your question on why those journals are not indexed, probably they are in the pipeline. They might be indexed in the coming next evaluation as well. Probably they do not comply with all standards or all benchmarks. Now, for example, there can be a very good journal, but it has been published only for the last 2 years or 3 years. But again, Scopus probably has a policy that the journal should be continuously being published for 5 years before it is indexed. So probably Scopus is just waiting for the 5-year period to complete. Once it completes, it will be indexed, right? So yeah, this is my answer to your question.
Yes, sir. The next question is how to get the discontinued journal in the Scopus database.
So as I said, go to sources. Under sources, you will find this particular tab, download Scopus source list. And within this, you will find a tab with discontinued list. So you can, let me just give me a second, sir. Let me see if I already have a downloaded file. I can probably open and show how it looks like. That will make it easier for everyone. Give me 1 second, sir. So I keep downloading this list and I don't, yeah, this is the one. So I don't usually save it because, just give me 1 second. Yeah. So this is, this is the list. This is the Scopus source list. Okay. And this is the discontinued titles, July. So you'll find the list of discontinued titles here, including the reason why this was discontinued, from which page number, which volume, which year has this been discontinued. All the details are here, right? And again, in the Scopus source list, you will find a tab which says active, inactive. You can filter using this. Or if you scroll down to your right, you will find all the details, the site score, you will find here. You will find the subject areas. So if you want to be very particular about a particular subject area, let's say only business management and accounting, just filter it out. It will only show you business management accounting titles, right? Yeah. So you can actually filter out using all.
Anybody can download this list, right?
Anybody can download this list, sir. Right?
Okay. Then one more question. I think it is the last question we can take.
Sure.
So after the publication is made in the Scopus Index Journal, how long does it take to be indexed in Scopus itself?
Scopus is updated daily. So if your article is accepted in a journal today and the journal submits that information to Scopus, it will be indexed the next day. You will be able to see the article the next day after it is formally accepted by the journal. So you will also find a lot of articles on Scopus from 2022, 2023. What are those articles? Those are accepted articles. These are articles in press. So once that article is accepted by the journal and they are due to be published in the upcoming volumes, still you can see that on Scopus. So that's how Scopus helps you, keeps you updated about what is happening currently, what has already happened, and then you can take the right decision. Right?
Okay, thank you, sir. Thanks for answering all the questions posed by the participants. So with this, I would like to thank you for being with us. You have given a wonderful session, which was very useful and informative to all the participants. Even I have learned something new from your presentation. Thank you so much.
I'm glad, sir.
I, on behalf of PSE, as well as from the participants group, would like to extend a heartfelt thanks to you for accepting our invitation and being a part of this program. Thank you once again.
Thank you so much, sir.